You have an idea. Now what? Welcome to this episode of Time to Start Up, hosted by the i3 Lab at the Global Lab. Thanks for having us here. On this episode, we will be talking about when someone has an idea, what are the next steps? What should they be doing? So, my name is Ardian Prechi. I'm the director of the i3 Lab at WPI, and I'm joined today with...
My name is Warich Ngam Ganjarat. I'm a PhD student at the i3 Lab.
My name is Salem Gutierrez, also a PhD student at the i3 Lab.
So, gentlemen, welcome to this second episode of our series. You know, we get this all the time from, especially our students, say, oh, I have ideas all the time, but I really don't know what to do next. Maybe we'll take a few minutes discussing on what steps should, generally speaking, people do to figure out if they should pursue this idea further or not.
So the things that we're going to talk about today is basically, in the case of students, if they come to us and then they say they have an idea or they just say they want to explore the startup landscape a little bit, what should they do? What should be the next step? What would be your responses?
So as the old saying goes, ideas are cheap and execution is everything. Everybody should bear that in mind because that's extremely important. But I tell students all the time, especially when they come to visit us at the i3 Lab and the model that we use and what we need to do. And there is usually a method to the madness. Often entrepreneurship and starting a company or a business or a venture, it's usually difficult and, it takes a lot of effort and time. But there are steps that you need to take to validate your idea. So initially is figuring out, are you really solving a problem? Or is just some wishful thinking in your head? And figuring out the methods of how do you solve that problem. Is the problem you're solving a big need? Or is it something that it's a problem just for you and maybe your next door neighbor or you and your kid or you and your friend, but it's not a big need that people will pay money for it? And going out there and figuring out, is anybody willing to pay for what are you trying to build? However, in order to get to that point, you need to be able to crystallize your idea and get to the point that you can formulate what you want to build very well. The amount of times we get people, and you guys are with me most days when we meet students and they come in and we're like, we're trying to build a thing and it has a name, but and then they take an hour explaining what they're trying to do. So helping them boil it down to a point where they can, in a minute or two, in a short paragraph and a couple of sentences, they can tell anybody what their business is. That's a sort of starting point.
Yeah, many times students stop me and ask me that question. I have many ideas. What do I do now? And I think one of the first things that I say to them is, the first thing we need to figure out is to have some clarity on the idea, because we might think this is the best idea in the world, and we might expect others to feel the same way. So what I say to them is, okay, let's see first if you have clarity on that idea. Is that actually a need? Somebody needs this? Are you fixing a problem that exists? Because a very common problem that I see is that they try to come up with ideas and then try to find a problem. But you cannot start like that. You need to start first exploring problems and then figure out what's the need. So this is what is happening, but what the customers might need. So that would be the starting point. If they have clarity on this, then we can say that's a good start.
By the way, I want to plug this in because I know we're usually, our audience is mainly students because we work with them all the time. But from my experience, this is a general problem for most
That's true,
people
yeah.
who are working on it with an
Yeah.
idea to start something. So it's not that it only applies to students. Most people that are, especially first-time founders, they struggle with the steps of incremental steps of what to do to get to the point they need to do. I met many people that they were looking to, we want to pitch to a VC, or we want to go in front of a panel to raise money or to do certain things, and they couldn't articulate what they did. But they would want to spend an hour trying to convince you that it is really, truly very important what we're doing. I'm like, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe it could be, but you have to articulate it better.
Right. So yeah, both students and just general public in general who want to start startups, if you think about it, I think I did some research. You can categorize them as two, broadly speaking, just two categories. The first one is product to market, and then the second one is market to product. And the way that we categorize them is that we start with the first one. We start with product or ideas, right? We have this research, we have this patent that we want to monetize it, and then we look at where the customers are, and then we try to find the customer needs. The second one is the market centric. Basically, you look into what are the problems, you look at the pain, you look at the gain, and then you see, okay, what would be the best innovation or the products that you can put in and then fill those gaps. So that's this big debate again of which one is better. What do you guys think?
I don't. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there is better approach. I would say it depends on the context on the company. If you're an established company, and especially if you're in the tech market, then you can start and say, let's start thinking of innovation. I will create this. It looks like something that nobody else has done. Then you can say, and if you have the resources, try to market this product and see if I find a space in the market for this. But if you're a startup, if you're a student or anybody else who doesn't have the resources, I wouldn't recommend this because you don't have the resources to play with it. You need to start by asking customers, asking not just your family or your friends, because sometimes you make the mistake and say, my family said this idea would work. My friends say the same thing, but you need to do a little bit more. And that's when comes the famous customer discoveries, right? When we start interviewing customers. So I would say it depends on the context. In general terms, I would always recommend we need to identify a problem first.
Yeah.
So there's often a lot of startups and people that are trying to start something that they are trying to find a problem for their solution. And it's kind of funny the amount of time you see that, and please try to identify problems and to what you guys said earlier, pain points.
Right.
If you are not fixing something that it's a pain point, most likely you are trying to find a problem for the solution that you have, and it might be often the case that you're not going to find a market for it. There are times and there are things that you might be way ahead of everybody else in some innovations, but those are the rare cases. The majority of cases, if you're not looking for the pain points, you're most likely you're not going to get anywhere, which leads to that thing that we talk all the time to students, to everybody we meet, like, what is your value? And, the concept of value proposition that we teach and we explain to people often, and sometimes people listen, sometimes they don't. And then eventually they will get back to it, because if you don't have some value to add, if you don't have what I call, often people refer to it as the unfair advantage, meaning that you have you have an edge basically, or something else. I call it the X factor. Personally, that's my sort of go-to. What's your X factor? Why should we give you the star? What is it that you're doing that makes a difference? And if you cannot identify that, then most likely you have to go back to the drawing board. And,
Yeah, that's why I say if you're an entrepreneur, especially a student, you might not have, not all cases, but most cases, you might not have the time, resources to say, okay, I think this might work, so I'm just gonna try it. But so it is better to go there and actually ask customers, potential customers, as many as you can, because in the end, this might work, but we need some validation. And value proposition is a good point because that's what basically connects our business to the customers. That's kind of the bridge. So that's a great point, and that's an important element in our courses, which is something we're going to talk about in a little while. But value proposition is very important. What value do I bring to the customers?
Okay, Alan, actually, can you explain a little bit more to the audience of what is value proposition? And I know that it's also related to business model canvas too, which is the framework that startups always use when they want to startups. Even big companies use it. So can you explain more about the value proposition?
Yeah, so value proposition is actually one of the elements of the business model canvas, which is basically a new way to define, to prepare our business models. So in the past, we used to prepare business plans, right, which is like a lot of papers about our company, our finance and everything. But now there is this framework where one of the elements is the value proposition. And as I said before, is what connects the business to the customer. So there is a template for that that starts with the customer. So you first need to identify who the customer is, and that's how you start with the value proposition. If you don't understand who the customer is, how do you know what's the need and what's the potential solution and bring it to the market? So you should start in the value proposition, who the customer is, what's the need they have, which we identify the need with the problem we have. And then we need to also understand what are we bringing to these customers. So we start with the customer segment, then we move to the problem, and then what is our solution. But an important part of the value proposition is also the competitors. We need to understand what is out there. So is what I'm bringing to the market something that is already there? So if it's yes, then probably you don't bring too much value to the market.
Everything rotates around the needs of the customer. And I can look back at all the businesses that I was involved, either started or involved with. The ones that always failed, the value proposition was weak, or it was only we believed that it was good, but actually wasn't good. And the businesses that succeeded, and that's not the only reason, but they had strong value proposition. And when you have a strong value proposition, that means that you have identified a clear pain point from the customer's perspective, which also mean that somebody will be willing to put their hand in their pocket and pay you. Yeah. Because if nobody's willing to put their hand in their pocket and write a check and give you money for it, that means it's not a great value proposition. So it boils down to that eventually.
Yeah, and in the end, everything revolves around supply and demand. So that's kind of the hardest thing to find for an entrepreneur, because supply is what is out there, and demand is what customers want or need. So if you identify that gap, you have high chances to succeed. But if you don't, how can you actually start this journey?
So I want to make a quick point on this, because sometimes people might get sort of thrown off a bit, where they can say, hey, there is different companies out there that they do the same thing. And therefore, maybe this value proposition that we're talking about, you have to be unique, could be a little bit contradicting, or why is that? Why are you guys teaching this and talking about the value proposition so much when there is thousands of taxi companies? Let's say there is Uber, there is Lyft, there is Microsoft, Google, and all these, let's say companies that do similar things. If you look at all of them, there is at least one or two things that they do completely differently. And that is the X factor. Yeah. That is the differentiator for them. Okay. So your value proposition doesn't have to always be something extremely, always completely new. So it could be an addition, but it has to be a strong addition that it's not easy to replicate very quickly,
And
or
that's
that allows you to get market share enough, then it becomes difficult for people to replicate.
That's a great point, because sometimes entrepreneurs feel like innovation is just about something new, but it's not necessarily something new. It might be something that exists already, but in a new place, a place that it was not before. Or you might deliver this in a different way. So innovation comes in different ways. So I also wanted to bring to conversation our courses. What do we offer now to our students?
Yeah, so let's go back to that, Alan, since you have led the build-up of the courses for the i3 Lab for the ideation stage. So as a student comes to us and says, knock, knock, I have an idea. I'm trying to play with this. What do we do? Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, so as we mentioned before, the very first step is to make sure that the student understand what's the need. The needs must be clear. Yeah, exactly. So another question that they have is, they focus too much on the problem, which is fine. That's the starting point. But that's just the beginning. We need to identify the problem. Once we have the problem, they have to establish clearly, okay, so what's the need now? Okay, so don't stay with the problem, identify what's the need. And after that, they need to do some kind of reflection. That's how we call it. Reflect on yourself and your idea and see how's your approach. So what your solution looks like, and then your benefits. What are the benefits? What is that value you're bringing to the market? And what I say is also you have to think about numbers. So then just tell me I'm faster, I'm better. Tell me that in numbers. How fast are you? How better are you? In which terms? And then we move to competitors. They need to do a little market research. So that's the first step. Identify the need. How's your approach? What you bring to the market in quantifiable terms, and then do some market research. And there are a couple of frameworks for that. We use the NABC, which is the need, approach, benefit, and competitors, which sounds very simple, but that helps students to reflect on themselves and their ideas and come up with these elements clearly.
And our ideation stage program has about 4 or 5 modules, correct?
Yeah, we have 4 modules plus the pitch. So the final assignment would be the 5th module. Yeah.
Preparing a pitch
Okay.
deck.
Exactly.
So just to give them a little taste, can you explain what the NABC is?
Yeah, it's what I mentioned is they have to identify the need,
So N is
the
a need.
customer segment. So
Okay.
who is this product for,
Mm-hmm.
and then what do they need?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first element. The second element is the approach. So
Okay.
how does your solution look like?
Mm-hmm.
So is it a software? Is it a hardware? How does it look like? What kind of features you have? AI, machine learning. And the next step is the benefits. So how do they help the customers?
Yeah.
In use numbers. So tell me how fast are you? How better? If they say time, how much time they save? It has to be estimation, of course. We just need to have some estimations. And then we finish with the competitors. So
Okay.
what is out there? And very important, how are we better than them?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we start.
Which drops back to value proposition.
Exactly.
Yeah,
What
and-
differentiates you?
Those NABC will lead to the value proposition, right?
And that's the second module. Exactly. The second module is to develop a business model canvas. And guess what is the most important element there?
The value
But yeah, another important step that they are going through is customer discovery. So when they finish the business model canvas, they start asking customers. So now it's time to validate our ideas. Now let's see if I have something special for the industry I'm trying to enter.
Okay, so how do you find customers then? Let's say I have an idea that I want to pursue. How do I find my customer?
So you have to get out of the building.
Okay.
And actually, there's a little booklet that we used to give out here that says, go and meet people.
Yeah.
I think that's the title, which means nobody's going to find you in your dorm room if you're a student, in your basement, if you're not a student, or in your kitchen table, wherever you are, you need to get out there and find people to talk to. Now, in the process of customer discovery, again, my sort of, I always say there's a method to the madness, because the more you know how to use these techniques, the better you get at it. There's a method that we probably will talk at some other episodes more in depth about customer discovery and more in depth about value proposition and all these. There's a method of how to do customer discovery and to make sure that you're getting good feedback, and then you can work with that feedback from potential customers to validate your hypothesis. Right. Am I really building something that's needed, or this is just wishful thinking in my head? So we teach all, as we do, we teach all that process, but it is very important to get out there and talk to potential customers. If you don't do that, you really don't know what you're building. You would have absolutely no idea. And then there's methods how to go about it. You reach via LinkedIn and connections, and you ask everybody you know for help to connect you to people in the industry, or depending what you're building. But if you don't get out of the building and go and talk to potential customers, you're never going to build the right thing, and most likely you're not going to sell it either, because nobody is coming to find you in your basement. You have to go to them, and that's
really true. That's very true. There are a lot of startups actually that failed because they just assume that something will happen. They was assume that their customers will love their products for sure, but they just assumed it. They never tested it. They never talked to real customers, and then they failed. And the process that you actually were explaining, that is the lean startups method. It was originated by Steve Blanks and from Stanford, and that was from academia. So you know a lot of stuff in theory already. I can see that.
Yeah, I have no idea where the theory comes from. So unfortunately for me, I in my past life prior to WPI, I can probably count, I won't say on this podcast, how much money I have lost just by not fully knowing in my early years what customer discovery is. And I don't mind having this in record, that the students, they are going to understand what customer discovery is. The students that are going to understand through this programming that we're doing what and how to build the right value proposition, and what is the difference between a problem and a need. Because often a problem is, I woke up this morning and I got stuck on a traffic light, so I'm going to do something about the traffic light system. Maybe you shouldn't, because maybe you should just wake up earlier, and that's not a big enough problem for you to try to wrap a business around it. So you should really dig deep to what are pain points, what is hurting certain industries out there that you can fix something with your solution. So we do a lot of the events that we do internally here at WPI to get students, to ignite them and get them out of their shell and network, and sort of be relaxed around networking and all that stuff. They should take these opportunities to do that internally here and break the ice and be comfortable with networking, because when it comes to business development, when it comes to even finding a job, I know this podcast is not directed for that. Even when it comes to anything, networking is a lot. So we used to have that old saying when I was in sales years ago, that we used to do cold calls, which is the equivalent of, students probably will be familiar with this, is, when you hit easy apply on LinkedIn 300 times to apply for an internship and nobody calls you back. That's what cold calling used to be for salespeople. You call a list of numbers trying to sell them things and nobody's answering. So we used to say cold calling is God's punishment for people who don't network enough. So get out there, network. And when you're tired, network a little bit more. If you're starting a business or doing anything else in life, that is really important.
Okay. So let's break it down for everyone a little bit more. So you said talk to people, talk to customers, if I want to start a startup right now, who should be the first one that I talk to? Should it be the first customers, or just anyone I know? Who would it be?
If you're a
That's
student or
great question.
For general starters.
project plan. And for students at WPI, first of all, they should come to the i3 lab, and then we will help you go through the steps, because that would make your life way easier. But generally speaking, if you have no access to our resources and to us, you should try your best to find all the entrepreneurial support organizations in your town, city, or wherever you live. Get connected to them. Start taking part on all the accelerators that are available out there. Try to get in as many incubators as you can. Doesn't matter if they give you money or if they pay a lot or not or whatever. The network that comes with it, the access that comes through these programs.
Okay. So another question, I think I would direct it to Alan, because you are the expert on the courses. So let's say we're doing this lean startup methodologies, just like what Aryan said. We created hypotheses, and then we try to validate them. We talk to customers, and then what if our assumption or our hypothesis is wrong? What we're gonna do with it?
Yeah, I'd say there are three things that could happen. One is that we confirm our assumption. That's perfect. Not always happen.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that would be amazing. The second thing that would happen is that it might work, but I might need to make some adjustments to my hypothesis.
so pivoting.
Yes, it's pivoting. That's it. I mean, some of them are scared about the process, like what the feedback will be, but that's fine. That's actually the end goal, to understand the customers. So that's the second thing that could happen. That might work, but we need to adjust something, pivot. And the third thing, we realize that this won't work, and that's also fine. That's part of the process. And you eventually will come up with another solution or idea that might work, and you start the process again. So in the end, you still gain some experience.
For example, all the research labs at WPI I work in and are full of like gem of innovation, and it's amazing what's actually going on here. But there's a path from research to commercialization, and that segment, the path to commercialization, involves all these things that we talked about. Because there's basic research and there's research that's done, you might invented something, but is it a great invention? But right now there's no usage for it. There's no application to it. Or is it some applied research, and then you can turn that into potentially a product, and then you still have to go through these steps to figure out if it's a need, if it's a big need, or where is it going to fit to the pivoting that Alan was mentioning. Like maybe you're thinking in the lab that, I'm going to do this on, I don't know, something around med tech, but then you figure out that it's pure healthcare, or you'll only find this out when the old saying is when the rubber hits the road. So when you go into the market. Summarize. So essentially what you're saying, that we don't skip the steps, put in the work, validate your hypothesis.
Hypothesis or assumptions.
Or assumptions.
Come up with the right questions.
Be critical to your idea, because just because it's yours, that doesn't mean it's...
to fail.
It's absolutely okay to fail. There's only learning or winning. And, it's just like riding a bike or swimming. You can read a lot of books about it, but if you don't start swimming in the river or wherever you go to swim, you're never really going to know how to swim. So you can read a lot of literature, which is great, but if you're going through the road of startups, that practical side of taking the steps to do these things becomes important. And also, always look for mentors. Mentors are key to this. It's the amazing thing. The mentors are, it's pretty good.
Actually, before we wrap up, I know that there's a lot of misconception about schools or university takes some equity from their product. So that's why some of the students might not want to talk to the school or like try to do a submarine method of it. What would be your advice?
For WPI students only, especially, We can't speak for any other university. The I3 Lab is here to help you with your ideas,
Okay.
to potentially turn them into startups, or if you don't, you'll get a lot of benefits from the entrepreneurial mindset and the learning you'll get, and nobody takes anything from you. We take no equity or any part of your business. Also, WPI as a whole does this for students, which not many universities do. We do our Office of Technology Innovation that does the patenting. They will file provisional patents for any student for free.
For free.
I will not say what the amount is, but usually those things cost north of 10 grand to file one.
Yeah.
So every student who's working on something, they have the benefit of all the resources and the help that we do at the I3 Lab and the filing of provisional patents for free. It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
When I look back through my life and my career, I only wish I had something like this. Not because we work here, not because of, we have to say this, but really it is pretty amazing the resources that students can have if they wish, and the ones that want to go through that startup journey.
Yeah. And I just want to say that everyone can expect some level of confidentiality from us too. So don't hesitate to reach out to us, talk to anyone really, talk to your mentors, and then explain as much as possible. And then we also have office at the
Yeah.
I3 Lab.
Office hours
Anytime.
every Wednesday is 1 to 3. The I3 Lab
Always 1 to 3.
is at the second floor of the Innovation Studio at the INE Center. So we'll be filming these episodes once a month. Stay tuned for the third episode. And until then, from me, Ardian Prechi,
I'm Rich.
Alan Gutierrez.
have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.